Good evening and welcome to the Friday webinars at Wharton Arts. It's a series dedicated to making authentic connections between art and life through the sharing of stories, expertise, and creations by guest artists of varied disciplines. My name is Helen Cha-Pyo, Artistic Director of Wharton Arts and the curator and the host of the Friday webinars at Wharton Arts. Wharton Institute for the Performing Arts comprises the New Jersey Youth Symphony, Patterson Music Project, and the Performing Arts School as New Jersey's largest nonprofit performing arts education organization, serving over 1,200 students of all ages and abilities through a range of classes and ensembles. Tonight, I have the pleasure of speaking with guitarist and composer Raul Abbad and Nicholas Rodriguez, Artistic Director of Inner City Ensemble, a youth dance group in Patterson, New Jersey. Together, we will explore Raul's new composition, La Frontera, Stories of Migration in Movement. It is a 20-minute multi-movement piece for string ensemble, percussion quartet, piano, guitar, and voice that honors the journey of migrants and ties together this common human experience, drawing upon the composer's extensive experience performing and composing classical, Latin, jazz, and fusion music. With the support of New Music USA, New Jersey Youth Symphony newly commissioned this original composition to create a performance that celebrates the stories of immigrants through music and dance. I'm going to introduce you to our composer first, and then our choreographer. Born and raised in Lima, Peru, Raul Abbad Huaman is an eclectic guitarist and composer based in the New York City metropolitan area. Raul grew up listening to his mother's records of traditional Peruvian guitarist Raul Garcia Zarate, which became a source of inspiration to him. This led him to seek out Garcia Zarate as a guitar teacher and studied with him. After moving to the United States, Raul studied music education, classical guitar, and composition at Montclair State University. He performs regularly with the Michaela McLean Band on guitar. And when Raul is not composing and performing, you can find him teaching guitar and music technology at J.P. Stevens High School. Our choreographer, Nicholas Rodriguez, began his early training with Ralph Gomez in Patterson, New Jersey. He graduated from the Juilliard School with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in dance. Nicholas performed with Ballet Hispanico, Melissa Fenley, to name a few, and most extensively with Dance Compass, which he co-founded. Throughout his 12 years with Dance Compass, which was based in Montclair, New Jersey, Nicholas created more than 35 dance works, the majority of which premiered in New Jersey to critical acclaim. Nicholas received 3 choreographers' fellowships from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, and he set original choreography on the Alvin Ailey Repertory Ensemble, the Yard on Martha's Vineyard, Garden State Ballet, and American Repertory Ballet, among many others. Nicholas's works have been presented at the Theater of the Riverside Church, Dance Theater Workshop, Jacob's Pillow, Lincoln Center Out of Doors, and in Paraguay, Ecuador, and Bolivia, where he conducted his Fulbright residencies. As the artistic director of Inner City Ensemble, the work of Nicholas Rodriguez addresses cultural identity and social justice and reform issues. I am so thrilled to be joined by these wonderful artists, and let's start our conversation of how this collaborative work has come together from the inception all the way to Raul really finishing this composition just most recently. So welcome.
Hello, how are you? Glad to be here.
It's great to have you. Hello, Nicholas. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello. Thank you for having us here. This is so exciting.
I know the three of us have seen each other on Zoom screens like this together because we've been talking a lot about how to collaborate together. And I know that I had mentioned in your in the bio at the beginning that this was in part made possible by New Music USA grant. And so from being the principal conductor and artistic director of New Jersey Youth Symphony, I said I would love to apply for this grant. And it is really a supporting the work of living composers, American composers. And so this idea came and I contacted Raul and he was more than happy to come up with this idea of writing a multi-movement piece that might be based on his life story. And also, during this time, it is really important for us to constantly try to look for new creative work and collaboration that has a lot to do with kind of the situation that we are in. We live in America, land of immigrants. And I think this personal story, kind of paralleling the music, is a really fascinating way for us to really engage our students to learn a new piece of music. So, Raul, I'm going to just start with you. If you don't mind just telling us kind of, the genesis of this piece and what your thoughts are. And I wouldn't mind you going kind of right into to the music
Yes,
itself.
definitely. I'd be glad to do that. About a year ago, right when we started this project, when we started talking about doing this project, I was asked by Helen to come up with an idea that would represent more or less my story or my life as it changed from being born in Peru to moving here to the United States almost about 20 years ago, just a little more than 20 years ago. Um, so in the beginning, just trying to brainstorm some ideas, I was listening to some music by a composer from Uruguay. His name is Jorge Drexler, and he has this song that is it's almost like rap, but it's kind of like spoken word. And he has this one phrase that he keeps mentioning: "Yo no soy de aquí, pero tú tampoco." I'm not from here, neither you are, no, nor
Mm,
you are. So not necessarily in an aggressive way, not like saying like, "Oh, you're not from here," but like, you know, we all come from somewhere else. We're all immigrants, you know,
right.
and
I think
so
that's the really the basis of it. We are all immigrants. We all come from somewhere and we're all going somewhere and we don't
Mm.
just, yeah. So I think that that's the premise of it. And I think that's a beautiful way to say that. Yeah.
right. So then I started thinking about not only my personal journey from Lima to here, but also how the people that came before me, my mom, my dad, how they had to move, also how their journeys around Peru, um, how that affected also me being born in Lima and then eventually coming here. So in the piece, at first I start with the journey of my mom. She was born in the Andes, in a very small town in the Andes called Chimarca, and she moved from there to Lima, which is the capital of Peru, at a very very young age, about 8 years old. And but it wasn't just like one train ride or one bus ride down from the Andes to Lima. It took years actually to make it from her small town to Lima, making stops and just living with different people along the way, and then finally settling in Lima, where she met my dad about 15 years after she got there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I started a piece with some motifs from the Andes.
Mm.
I'll play a little bit in a second, like the yarabis and huaynos, and that's actually how the music from Raul Garcia Zarate, my former teacher, how that plays into it. Um, because I got to know this music through his playing and through my mom listening to that music, which is very melancholic and very, I don't know. It gives you this sensation of space. I don't know if you've ever been in a highland like that. That's very the Andes. There are some places that is very high and flat, and it gives you the sensation of like, oh, you're almost like in a different planet.
Mm.
Um,
So that the landscape, is kind of really shaping your soundscape, because I can totally see that when I hear how you're beginning, of your piece, right? And
right, yeah.
also, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that kind of the language that originally we didn't really have a singer in mind, but you came to me and said, could I add a guitarist and the singer? Because initially, when conductor is commissioning a piece, I have an instrumentation in mind and I run it by the composer. I said, I would love a piece with strings, and I wanted percussion quartet, because NJYS, we have a freshly minted percussion quartet, and representing 4 different parts of the world. And, we were all coming, and moving around. And I would love dancers to be kind of weaving in and out. But then we never talked about a singer or a guitarist. And when you came and adding the piano, and I said, absolutely. And so we kind of worked together on that instrumentation before you really finalized it. And so maybe tell us a little bit about the language too.
Sure, sure. So so the words and the first movement actually is called Yaraví, and Yaraví it comes from Quechua. Quechua it's a language from the Andes. You can find it all the way from southern Colombia to northern Argentina. That was the language that the Incas used back, back before the 1400s. It's not as usual to see it spoken in Peru, especially in the big cities. But my mother speaks it still, and actually she will be doing some voiceovers for some sections in the first movement, in which she will recite a poem that's called Kiyo Kiyo. And Kiyo Kiyo, it's just an onomatopoeic sound for a bird from the Andes.
Mm.
And I will, the people will be able to listen to that when we have it all put together.
I think that's so cool. We have a native speaker, who can really speak that language, and the sound of the nature too, kind of, bringing us to that landscape. That's really beautiful. So, so the piece is in 4 different movements, and you said that reflects kind of how you came from Lima all the way to Elizabeth, New Jersey. Could you talk
Right.
us to us about that a little bit?
Yes, definitely, definitely. So the first movement actually is mostly about my mom's journey to Lima. How it starts from a very quiet, very serene movement where I kind of describe the landscape, as we were mentioning before. And then it gets into the wino. Wino with an H, of course. Wino. It's a dance that is in 2/4, and that's very traditional from the Andes. You get different names depending on where you might be. If you, let's say, go to Argentina, you might hear the same kind of dance, which kind of sounds like the basic rhythmic pattern is. And if you go to Argentina, you might they call it carnavalito, a little carnival. If you go to Bolivia, it's guaño with an N with a hat. So yeah, it gets different names depending on where you are, but it's very common in South America. So um, then the piece moves into the second movement, which is the marinera.
Mm-hmm.
And the marinera is also another rhythm that you can find all over South America. And since it's like a 6/8 kind of thing, and it has a hemiola that keeps changing between 3/4 and 6/8. And of course, this is written out, but usually when it's just improvised, um, people just kind of like the traditional musicians just kind of magically feel where the 6 will come or the 3 will come, and it could be confusing to those who are not familiar with it. But I think it's beautiful how it just naturally changes from one to
Mm-hmm.
the other.
Right.
Um, and then the next one is the cumbia. Now the cumbia is not necessarily from Peru. Now we're talking about more, I guess, from Colombia all the way to Mexico. So that's how, the marinera, which is the name especially, is very very much traditional from Lima. Then we go into this more, I guess, Latin American generic rhythm, which is cumbia, and that's the third movement, sorry, and that more or less represents my move from Lima,
Mm-hmm.
where you can find cumbia, of course,
Mm-hmm.
to here, where you can find all these different types of cumbia from Mexico, from Argentina, from Ecuador. and then the last movement, it's called the airplanes, and it's more or less like a representation of what how we travel, how like we at this point in history we travel. That more or less it's a contrast between the way, let's say, my mom traveled from her small town to Lima, and the way we travel now, just using airplanes, and the things that we can achieve by just using this way of transportation is much faster than the
Right.
bus or even walking. You know?
Hmm. Yeah, so those are the four movements, kind of tracking how you kind of came to this country. And I myself, as an immigrant, coming to America at the age of 12, really, do feel my roots back at home in Korea. So for me, although it is your story, when I was studying the score and having received it, yeah, the rhythms and the sound and all of the modes are very different than where I come from, but I totally could relate to the journey, going from one a part of the world to another part of the world, physically, but also emotionally, and also spiritually. And I think that's why I think telling your story, I can relate to it, although it's not the same. It becomes kind of my journey as well. And I think that's what's so powerful about composers infusing their personal spirit into their music. And so I really am really falling in love with this piece. By the way, I know musicians have not seen the music yet. We're going to tackle this when we come back in January from our winter break, and hope to perform this at the end of February. That's only if we are allowed to do a bit of in-person rehearsals, and that's the pandemic situation that we're in right now. But before I bring Nicholas into this conversation, because we're talking a lot about rhythm and movements, and so where we're going with this, we see and feel the dancers. I wonder, Raul, if you could just play some of the MP3 files of the music so that our audiences and our guests can kind of get a sense as to what you're, describing.
Definitely. I'll play a little bit of each movement just so you can get an idea. So let's see. So this is the first movement. This is the very beginning of the piece. Right, so that's the opening, and then on that same movement, I'll just fast forward a little bit. Then we have the wino, which is the rhythm in 2/4. So that's the first movement with those two sections, with two main sections of the first movement.
Yeah, it's, I'm looking over at Nicholas, and he's about to get up and dance here. Right?
Hard to just listen to that as a choreographer dancer. It's wonderful to listen to.
Yes. Yeah, let's hear a little bit of the rest of, let's not give it away, but maybe a little bit of a foretaste of the rest of the movements, and then we'll go to Nicholas.
Sorry, this is the second movement. This is the second movement now. This is the Marinade movement. That's the second one, and then the third movement. This is the Cumbia. And finally, the fourth movement.
Our percussion quartet, looking at the score, they're going to have quite the setup in four corners of the stage. And we talked about during this COVID-19 time that our string section will have to be reduced. This could be performed by a full string orchestra. And however, in this case, we may have to just reduce it down to the space that we can safely put socially distanced all of our players. But because of the space in between, when Nicholas and Raul and myself, we got together after Raul gave us the MP3 files and the first draft of the score, we kind of started to really imagine what would look like to have four dancers weaving in and out of between the musicians on the stage. And it kind of opened up some possibilities that normally we wouldn't have with a full orchestra. So there's some interesting talks about this. So Nicholas, I'm going to turn to you at this point. Raul has created this beautiful soundscape that really makes us kind of, transports us to a physical location, but also kind of our emotional location of home, and then away from home, and then making a new home kind of thing. And as a dancer, as a choreographer, you've been with us from the very beginning of this process. Yet you and I are on the receiving end. Raul is the creator. You are going to have to interpret his music because he has no indication as to what he wants the dancers to do. I have a lot more instruction from the composer. When I look at the score, I get a lot of instructions. So my job is to study it and make sure that Raul's intentions are served the way that he intended it, and communicating that to the musicians, and teaching the music and performing it together. But for you, how do you begin when you get something like this? Tell us what goes through your mind and where you are with this process right now.
Thanks for asking me that, Helen, and thanks for inviting me into this wonderful collaboration. So the first thing I do is just listen to that music and just respond. So the first thing I hear is wonder and voices and joy and journey. I could hear sort of traveling in that experience. I hear tension. You know, there is some danger, right? So these are the things that I hear. I don't know if Raul was intending that, but I hear journey. I start thinking adjectives, and then I kind of consider how that will land and be interpreted in movement and through. And so the process is I listen, I get familiar with the scores of the time signatures. Some of these music forms also have dance forms to them, so I'll consider if I'm going to incorporate that. And then I'll interpret that, and I'm going to talk about the creative process at the beginning. I do want to say one of the things that I bring to the experience, or that I extract from it, right, is that, you know, I so identify with Raul's story. So, you know, my parents are Puerto Rican, so they came here as Americans, but they too had a journey by plane, and they lived in Brooklyn for a while, in the Bronx, and they were here. So I too have a, you know, at least a migration story, and I agree that we are all, you know, sort of guests and visitors on this remarkable planet in this country. So so that's the first thing. I have that connection culturally. And then I had the blessing and the gift of traveling as a Fulbright scholar, and I actually went to Paraguay and Ecuador and Peru and Bolivia. So there's something about the wonder of that geography and the expanse of it and the culture, and I'm familiar with some of the music. So I just feel like it's I'm glad I have that context. So there's the music as inspiration, and as you said, we're receiving it. So I'm starting at the ground floor in a way, but it's such a privilege to take this gift of music. And what I want to share with you, and I'm actually going to take it into the space in a minute, but the first thing I do is just to open up to creativity, so that I'm not blocked. I open up the channels for moving. And I'm gonna talk through that a little bit, and then I'm gonna play the music and improvise a little bit. So there'll be the first phase of the creativity where I'll listen and experiment, communicate with Raul again, think about ways that I might literally or sort of symbolically bring in the journey from high to low, what that might look like choreographically, and then as I build phrases, I'll transmit that to the dancers. And because this is collaborative, we'll keep communicating and probably share some of the movement and ideas. But so I'm going to start actually right here. So one of the things, I'm going to ask you to dance a little bit, if you don't mind. If you're watching, you can join us. I'll just start. I gave this dance improvisation to my dancers, and I just start by sort of identifying with my hands, and take a look at your hands. And show me your hands, and then flip one to the camera and look. And now I'm going to actually to focus on your hands and bring them closer to the camera. And I'm going to show you this a little more full body. And now just switch one with the other. Cover your face. Show me an expression. Hide. Change your expression. And then I'm going to improvise with my hands a little bit. Make some gestures. What else can the hands do? Punch. Forward. We can count. We can reach outside of the frame. So I'm going to stand up and be a little more, I'm going to explore more and be full, what I call invested in this idea of moving with the body. And I'll talk through sort of my process of creating. And I'm going to move into the space, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, you know, because you are actually creating something new,
yes.
You know, and we're going to be adding onto Raul. And this way, Raul is in the receiving end of this as the composer. and I just get to watch. I'm just, I'm recreating what's on the page, but this dance thing is really fascinating to me. And so I'm so happy that Raul and I said, let's add dancers. So yes.
And it's a privilege to get started. And I'll be integrating 4 dancers, most likely two young pre-professional dancers, 2 men, 2 women from the Inner City Ensemble who study at the Rosa L. Parks School of Fine and Performing Arts, where we've had a partnership for some time. So they're adept at improvising and then setting some of the material. So I'm going to go through this quickly, but hopefully clearly, and you can hear me. So I just showed you that exercise. So I'm going to talk and move through this. So before I get started, even with improvising, I'll start using movement that allows me to explore space reaching. So very quickly, and this is just to sort of get my body going, the way a singer might do arpeggio, a musician might do scales. Now this exercise is drawing with the elbows. I might give myself a prompt or an idea like a bounce, bend, balance. And then I might switch it, balance. So that's the prompt. Bounce, bend, balance, bounce, bend. And I use these prompts just to get myself going so that when I'm creating phrases that are then going to be set, I might find something. If I tell I think I like that, and as I listen to the music, that actually might become part of one of the phrases of the side. And I haven't really thought about it because I'm allowing myself to sort of enter into the creative stage of improvisation, and it might lead to other inventions. If I find something that I like, it may have come out of listening to the music or just quietly in the silence, I'll find a place in the music where I can integrate it. And I might also tell myself, that's sliding down the mountain reach. I'll give it a name or an intention or both, so then I can remember that phrase later on. So it can come out of improvisation, and then I'll remind myself that the bird flying backwards, I just made that up on the spot. So later on when I'm moving, I might find a place for a bird flying backwards on a branch. So I'm opening up to the ideas. So now in reality, and for our performance, you talked about the spacing because we're social distancing. I might have originally thought of this as a limitation, but actually as a choreographer, it gives me context, and it gives me actually the freedom to experiment within this square. And I think, oh, well, so la fronteras, borders, north, east, west, south. I can play with 4 corners. I can play with geography. This square can become a map. It become a room. I don't know if we'll talk about possibly, a detention center, which is not necessarily part of this story, but it's part of, our narrative right now. It could be a truck. So the square becomes the parameters in which I can experiment. Right? How else might I travel? This thing about journey. How else might I use movement that shows travel that's challenging, weighted? Another thing that I like to do, especially based on what Raul told me, is this whole idea of how might I represent a journey that takes me from up to down. I won't do that too many times unless I'm really warm. And then the last thing I want to share with you is this idea of, although I'm limited in space, I gave this exercise to my young dancers the other day. As I said, you only have this much space, but show me creatively as a dancer that the space may be physically limited, but show me that you're traveling at great distance. And they kind of said, what? I said, I want you to show me in your improvisation that you're traveling a great distance, that you're not bound by this square. And one of the solutions I came up with is this idea of the earth is round. The figure 8 kind of represents infinity. And as I was doing that, it felt like I could travel a great distance and feel very much like I'm able to, at least in my body, feel not limited to the square, but I can travel and create sort of the sense of limitless possibilities and a path.
You look beautiful doing all of that. Boy,
Well,
what an inspiration.
my challenge is I want to honor this creative process. And then I bring all of that to Raul's score and say, oh, that's right. This may be literal or suggested symbolic that there's this person's journey, possibly from high to low. And that could be very representational or literal. Then we might think about how the dancers would represent that idea of journey in the space. Mm-hmm. So anything that might seem like, oh, this is going to make it more difficult, I think that brings nuance and a creative challenge. And I'm going to play the music and take a deep breath. And then I'm going to improvise for just a few minutes to the wonderful beginning that you heard. We'll see how it goes. Great, thank you.
Wow, that was wonderful. You know, it's such a freedom that you embody, you know, as you improvise to the music. You know, as when we see a great jazz musician improvising, it's so inspirational to see that in a movement. That's great. Raul, what do you think about that?
It was great, very extremely expressive, and you know, I really enjoyed it.
I know we haven't really seen Nicholas kind of, you know, we've heard him talk about it, but it was just really wonderful to see the demonstration of how you we're thinking about phrases and intentions, and then for all of that to just kind of come to life, that's really beautiful. So wow, this is really exciting that we can talk about this right now. I feel like we just had a working session right in front of all these people in the webinar. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, yes.
But
I'm gonna stop my camera literally for 5 seconds to grab a towel. It'll be seconds.
Yes, that's no problem, no problem. So Raul, as you are kind of finishing up, and now we're going to have to kind of go into rehearsal time after the holidays,
Right.
and all of this synthesized sound that you're hearing, audience members, that's going to be, majority of them are going to be strings, and then you'll hear all of the percussion instruments. Obviously, we have purchased actually through this grant that all of the indigenous instruments, and culturally, that's authentic to the region that Raul, you're writing about and from. So we're really looking forward to expanding kind of the language with which our percussionists can learn to speak through their instruments. And then also maybe talk to us a little bit about the addition of the singer, because the singer really does not have a lot of words, except I know you wrote original poetry at the end, but there's a lot of just syllabic singing, and the guitar. Obviously, you as the guitarist, just maybe talk to me about and share with our audience about addition of those two instruments on top of kind of what we initially thought. And while Raul's doing that, I just want to invite all of the webinar participants who are in the webinar situation to feel free to put into the Q&A chat any of the questions that you may have for Raul and Nicholas, and for myself, and just in this presentation. So Raul, yeah, go ahead, tell us about the instrumentation, please.
Yes, definitely. So, so the singer, it's an idea that I've had for quite some time, that I've actually experimented with in some other pieces that I've written before. I think the voice is such a beautiful, pristine instrument when it's part of an ensemble, not just as a soloist in front, but it gives it this type of clarity that I don't think any other instrument could achieve, and especially in this kind of situation where you have a lot of strings. And the way I see strings is it's a very transparent sound. It's not like woodwind instruments that once they start playing, it's very clear and a little bit heavy. I mean, they're beautiful too, but they're more present than the strings. The string has this kind of transparent sound and when you put a singer with it almost as part of the string ensemble, it creates this really beautiful, very almost otherworldly kind of texture.
Yeah. So that's and we're really it's a mezzo, right? Low female voice.
Right.
So we're really looking forward to that. And then the guitar.
Right. Well, the guitar, I'm a guitarist, so so I always like to hear guitar, and it's a different color also. I think it's a little bit it could achieve some rhythmic textures that the piano can't really achieve, because you could have strumming patterns and things like that could make it's almost like a bridge between the percussive instrument and a choral instrument.
Right.
So yeah, I think I think it's a great addition, especially to give it a little bit more motion in the percussion part.
That's great. I'm going to read a paragraph that you wrote as part of our grant. I think this really brings us to the kind of the question time. You wrote, "A project like this gives voice to the marginalized in our society. I often compose music that bridges my two worlds of Peru and the United States. By bringing Peruvian, African, and other Latin influences into the classical music space, traditional music is carried forward in new spaces and brought to new audiences. My music is the music of migration. It's about creating new spaces culturally, musically, spiritually, and physically. My philosophy of composing and sharing music is to create a product that reflects working regular people and to share their authentic stories and struggles. This project is a perfect opportunity for me to continue sharing people's stories and voices and to reflect my story as an immigrant moving from Lima, Peru to Elizabeth, New Jersey. Of course, that was the composer's kind of statement that we had to include in the New Music USA grant. But I just wanted to kind of conclude our official presentation with your words in that it is so important to share our stories because you can lift up other people. It's not just your story, it is our story. And the more we can share each other's stories and increase empathy, between people within the community and in our society, I think we are doing something really important through the creative voice that we can as creative professionals here. So I know that we have some questions coming in. So I wanted to just let those words sit with our audience a little bit. So let me actually go to our first question. Was your creative process more independent when creating the music? And were the additional parts such as dancing and singing added to accompany the music? Or did you consciously think about the singers and dancers when creating this music? Raul, I think it's you. I should answer that. I think you're muted, so.
Sorry. So I think of music and dance as almost one thing, really. It might be because of the music that I've listened to since I was little. It always, music goes along with dance. There's no, or at least at that point in my life, there wasn't a gap between both things. It was, if there was music, you had to dance. Um, so in my composition process, I always think about how this music moves, and how the groove of the music uh, pushes forward in an almost dance-like kind of motion.
Yeah, and then you already kind of from the very beginning talked about these traditional dance rhythms, right? And going from 6/8 to 3/4 hemiolas, and so I think, yeah, I think who you are must be innately, you're thinking kind of rhythmically as well, and so the dance seems to be really natural. And actually, just to answer that question, the dance, adding the dance wasn't really an addition. It was a string orchestra, percussion, quartet, and we talked about dancers from the very beginning. I think the only thing that really got added were the voices and the guitar. The piano, as kind of the texture of piano is a really percussion instrument, pitched essentially. So that kind of ties that in. Does each dance have a meaning? We have an anonymous attendee asking that. I think, yeah, Nicholas, maybe, well, Raul's very specific about the titles and kind of even the location and where these rhythms are coming from. So,
Right. Yeah, so the first movement, as I mentioned before, is Yaraví, and why Yaraví is not necessarily a dance. It's more like a song. It's just a very melancholic type of song. And then the Huayno, which is from the Andes, it's in 2/4, as I mentioned before. And then the Marinera, which is a 6/8 kind of thing. It doesn't, Marinera means from like a Navy dance kind of thing, but it's one of those dances like the ones I mentioned before that it could change names depending on where you are. If you're in Argentina, it's called I think it's gato, I think cat basically. And if you're in Chile, it's cueca, and it changes names. It's basically more or less the same idea. Actually, in Mexico, it's huapango, which is famous because of the orchestral piece. So
right, right.
that same kind of groove. It just has slightly different kind of accent. Then the cumbia, which is a rhythm that you can find even nowadays. very famous and or very common in pop music in Latin
Right.
America. And then the last one is more or less almost like an R&B kind of thing, kind of a groove is the Airplanes. It's a modern thing.
we've, right, we've come to America. Um, Nicholas, however, I know that you put a lot of meaning into your movements. So maybe you can talk about that.
Well, and I wanted to say part of my research is and will be this idea that there may be the musical form and then there's the dance form, and sometimes a dance, not necessarily these dance forms, might be a courtship dance, or it might be a ritual, or it might be part of it might be a community dance. So oftentimes dances could just be festive celebration, part of a particular uh, the carnaval or some particular anniversary or cultural celebration. So typically the dances can be part of a ritual courtship or have a dance can have meaning even if it is a musical and dance form. So I wanted to say that. So I would research because I probably know some of the dances and what they are like. I know I recognize the phrase the cueca, which is many of the I learned it in Bolivia. That is a sort of a festive dance and it's kind of playful and courtship. So I actually don't know yet, but it would be really wonderful. It's such an excellent question because I would think how would that be integrated? Even with the social distancing, would I be able to create this idea of whether it's through eye contact or movement, this idea of there's still a partnership or a quartet, even with the distancing factor spatially? How do we create that quartet community literally or with some symbolism or some connection? And then I think it would be so important to bring in the cultural component. How do we bring in, even if it's a 2/4 or a 6/8, and that actually learn the steps so that then it's integrated in, and then maybe wrapped around a modern phrase or idea. So that would be a wonderful choreographic challenge.
Right. And also, dancers are dancing, but, I think the unique opportunity is that you have these musicians. If we have to socially distance, we may have to not have chairs, but just have music stands and have upper strings, just, stand up and play. There is an opportunity that you can have a movement for the string players as they play from one movement to another. And I think we talked about that possibility. Cellos and basses will not be able to move as much, but there you have some bodies there to move around as well.
I think musicians are dancing. They dance more than they actually. When I see someone play.
Yeah.
When I see a conductor, I think choreography and movement, and they're invested in the bodies involved. So I wouldn't want to scare the musicians and say
Right.
choreography because they've got a wonderful challenge right in front of them. But I think there would be an interesting way to do tableaus and maybe integrate some blocking. And if everyone's up to that challenge, I think that could be really exciting. And then it lends to this idea of journey and traveling. And
Absolutely. Right. And, troubadours, kind of the musicians that used to travel and play, right? And so I think it's not anything really foreign. We just modern day, we sit down and we're stuck on the stage. But I think freeing us would be a wonderful way for us to explore. So, audience members, here we are trying to continue to create new ways to express kind of Raul's music here in our first performance that we hope to do it in person at this point. Next question says, what is the most inspiring place you have ever found yourself in? Wow. Okay. Raul, does a place come to your mind? Because I think this is so specific location too. Yeah.
Right. Yes, actually, it's similar to what I was mentioning before about the Andes. There's these plateaus that are very high but they're very flat. And traveling one time from Cusco, which is in the Andes, is where, near Machu Picchu, to Lima. It's a 33-hour bus ride. And at some point in the middle of the night, you stop in basically the middle of nowhere. And it seriously felt like I was in a different planet, but it was so beautiful because, of course, there's no light pollution, no sound pollution at all. It was just basically us, the group of people that were traveling this bus, and then the completely dark sky and the stars, of course, and it was totally beautiful and very inspiring. You know, it's that happened years ago, like about maybe 17 years ago. But it's still that, you know, when I think of the Andes, especially, I think of that place and that, you know, that moment.
That sounds beautiful. Wow, Nicholas. And I think this is kind of important thing because you have that in your mind when you write music like this. And so this inspiration is very important for a creator like yourself.
I think in some ways the most awesome place, it was wonderful, also a little like terrifying, was the Niagara Falls, just the power of water and the sound and the boat riding getting close. But I would say that's number two. I think I also visited Cusco and Machu Picchu, and that was the first thought that came to mind. So it was just being in that place and that height, and I believe Machu Picchu is Mother Mountain. So there's the mountain and then the other mountain. Just there's something. There was something awe-inspiring. It took my breath away because of the altitude, but also because here I was in a civilization that had existed and had what they did with agriculture and the stones, everything about the history, but also just the geography of being in that altitude in that space was
Yeah.
Really connected me to history with even without words, just being present in that space.
That's beautiful. So we have one last question before we have to probably, call it a night. I think it's for you, Nicholas. How do you tell what dance to perform when the rhythm changes? I think it might be a dancer asking this.
How do I tell? Well, so sort of for me, the reason I improv is because I want to work my way into the music and learning it, really getting to know the score intuitively, improvisationally, and then eventually I will learn the 2-4-6-8. I think it's really exciting for me and for the dancers, but also challenging to work specifically with the rhythm as it is, and then actually I can go against it, so create a counter rhythm. And sometimes I also just love the idea that if it's a 2-4, if it's moving quickly, there's one of the sections that accelerates. So there's both a crescendo and it accelerates. It's interesting to try that, to experiment with that idea and really work with the music, but also to juxtapose it. So I sometimes like the idea of working with the music so that it's clear and aligned, and then playing with sort of a counter rhythm or creating a time signature against it. So I actually don't ever know for sure. So in the creative process, I'll try, option A, B, and C, and realize that really works well together there with the time signature. It's nice to do an adagio against that quick music, or it's nice to do a movement that accelerates really quickly as the music is slowing down. And I think it's intuitive, and then it's practice, and then it's just the creative process, experimenting and saying, aha, that's the one that works. And of course, the dancers always have opinions. So that's very important.
Right. And I think, it's same in music, and Raul can probably speak to this too, counterpoint is very important, right? Something that seems like it's opposing kind of what's there, but that without that, it's not as interesting. So I think, there's a life lesson about that. We celebrate our differences, different opinions, but as long as we know how to kind of, no pun intended, dance together on off beats and on the beats, there's a lot that we can do in this, wonderful society and our community of different cultural backgrounds, different walks of life, different perspectives. I think a creative, collaborative work really teaches us how to work together, kind of honoring each other's thoughts and feelings and perspectives, and then adding yourself to that picture. And I think that's why for orchestral playing, any ensemble playing that we do here at New Jersey Youth Symphony, we really is a life lesson about how to really become a valuable member of something that's larger than yourself, and you're part of something so much beautiful than what you can create alone. And And so I am so grateful for this collaboration. And I can't wait until our New Jersey Youth Symphony YS musicians to get the music, be able to learn from our composer, be inspired by our choreographer, and be flexible enough musicians to be able to maybe move around, uh, be able to learn new mode of playing and style and different scales and modalities. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity. So I just want to really thank both of you for going on this journey. And I really feel privileged to have had this chance to talk together. So I'm going to give you, I know we're a little bit over time, but, Raul, any kind of, inspiration to our young, perhaps composers, who are thinking about writing or who are just writing, thoughts down. Let's, maybe words of encouragement for creative beings out there.
Yes, definitely. Write what you feel. I think that's the most important part, that you have to feel the music. You have to also not necessarily be guided completely by theory, because that's a problem that, a lot of us musicians, sometimes a lot of times we think about the theory or the technique even before the emotion. I think it's very important to take the emotional part or the emotional context of the music as a very important part. And I think that's, yeah, I think that's where everything starts basically.
Yeah, thank you. Nicholas, anything from your perspective, just any wisdom you may have to our young people?
This probably sounds pre-planned, but it really isn't. I just thought how we are all remarkable, unique instruments ourselves, so that I'm a physical instrument, right? This is what I get. This is what I carry with me. And then all these wonderful, talented people, the young people, they get to express this connection, their artistry through whatever instrument they're playing. So I just echo what Raul said, that we are all distinct people. We're individuals, so that's what we bring to, even if it's a classical work, something that already exists on the page, we bring ourselves, we bring our interpretation, we bring our uniqueness. So I think I know as a young choreographer, there were times where I was imitating a choreographer that I liked. And then there were times where I thought, let me try this my own way. Let me find my own shapes, my own movement. And both were valuable, but just that idea of finding myself and letting the creative play and the exploration inform who I am. So the creative process and I meet somewhere in the middle.
Thank you so much, both of you, for those inspirational words. And my, encouragement to our young people is use your creative voice and be aware of what's going on in your life, in our lives together as a community. And as a creative person, there's a lot of things that we can do to, send a message, be able to express yourselves. And music and performing arts is a really amazing tool that we have and a gift. So go out and share it freely in whatever way you can to benefit other people and to really bless people who are around you. And during this time of Thanksgiving, there are many people who are shut-ins. And so if you can give a gift of music, encouragement, go out and do that. So thank you so much. This webinar, next Friday, we are off because it is Thanksgiving weekend. But the weekend after, we have a guest speaker, Noah Kageyama, a wonderful performance a psychologist and coach who will teach us how to really practice, and increase your skills, but also how to practice for performance as well. So I hope that you will join us next time for that. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us and have a safe and lovely Thanksgiving. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Raul. And thank you, Alyssa, for all of your support in the technology portion of this webinar. And so thank you. I really appreciate all of your presence.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Yeah, same.